The autumn air carried a crisp promise of winter as London streets buzzed with anticipation. Outside the Grand Royal Albert Hall, crowds gathered behind velvet ropes, their breath forming small clouds in the evening chill. Camera flashes illuminated the darkness like fallen stars, each one hoping to capture the perfect moment when royalty would grace the red carpet. Inside the magnificent venue, staff members moved with practiced precision, adjusting spotlights and checking sound equipment one final time. The Royal Variety performance, a tradition spanning over a century, was more than just entertainment. It was a bridge between the crown and the people, a night where laughter and music dissolved the boundaries between palace and public. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood before an ornate mirror in the private royal suite, her reflection wavering slightly as her lady-in-waiting made final adjustments to her elegant navy gown. The fabric caught the warm light, revealing intricate beadwork that sparkled like captured moonlight. But beneath the composed exterior that millions would soon admire, Catherine's thoughts drifted to a conversation she'd had with her youngest child just that morning. "Mummy, why do you have to go to work again tonight?" Little Louis had asked, his small hands clutching his favorite toy soldier. The innocence in his voice had pierced through her royal composure, reminding her of the delicate balance she constantly maintained between being a mother and fulfilling her duties to the nation. William, meanwhile, adjusted his formal dress uniform in the adjoining room, the weight of his military medals a familiar comfort against his chest. His fingers automatically went to straighten his tie, a nervous habit he developed during their early dating years, and never quite shaken. Tonight felt different somehow, charged with an energy he couldn't quite identify. As he fastened his cufflinks, a wedding gift from Catherine, his mind wandered to their early days together at university. Back then, the idea of standing before thousands as future king and queen seemed like a distant dream. Now, 12 years into marriage, and with 3 children depending on them to balance duty with devotion, every public appearance carried the weight of legacy. The sound of a gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, the car is ready," announced their private secretary, his voice carrying the respectful formality that had become the soundtrack of their lives. Catherine emerged from her preparation room, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. Even after all these years, William felt his breath catch. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was undeniably stunning in a way that made photographers scramble for the perfect shot. It was the quiet strength in her posture, the genuine warmth in her eyes that no amount of royal training could manufacture. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. She smiled, that radiant expression that had charmed a nation. "And you look every inch the future king." But as they made their way toward the waiting vehicle, Catherine's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. The morning school run replayed in her mind. Charlotte's tight hug that lasted a beat longer than usual, George's serious expression as he reminded her to wave at the cameras properly, and Louis's last-minute tears when he realized Mummy and Daddy wouldn't be home for bedtime stories. The royal car glided through London streets, past historic buildings illuminated against the dark sky. Inside, William and Catherine sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The city they would one day rule stretched out before them, millions of lives intersecting in ways they could only imagine. "Do you remember our first Royal Variety performance?" Catherine asked suddenly, her voice soft in the leather-scented interior. William turned to her, his eyes crinkling with the memory. "You were so nervous you forgot to eat dinner. I had to sneak you a chocolate bar from the green room. And you spent the entire evening making terrible jokes to calm my nerves." She laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. "They worked, didn't they?" Eventually, Catherine's expression grew thoughtful. "I keep thinking about what our children will remember of nights like this. Will they understand why we had to leave them with nannies and attend these events?" William reached for her hand, their wedding rings catching the passing streetlights. "They'll understand that sometimes serving others means sacrificing time with those we love most. And Hopefully, they'll see that we're trying to make their world a better place. The conversation was interrupted as their motorcade approached the Royal Albert Hall. Even from inside the car, they could hear the excitement of the gathered crowd. Camera crews positioned themselves strategically, and security personnel spoke quietly into their earpieces, coordinating the arrival that would be broadcast to millions around the world. As they paused at the final traffic light before their destination, Catherine caught sight of a young girl in the crowd, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, clutching a handmade sign that read, "We love you, Catherine." The child's face was pressed against the barrier, her eyes wide with wonder and hope. For a moment, Catherine saw her own children in that eager expression. She thought about Charlotte, who had recently started asking difficult questions about privilege and responsibility. Just last week, her daughter had noticed a homeless man outside their local shop and asked why some people didn't have warm beds when they had several palaces. "That little girl," Catherine murmured, nodding toward the crowd. William followed her gaze. "She reminds you of Charlotte." "She reminds me why we do this," Catherine replied. "Not for the glamour or the headlines, but for her. For all of them." The car came to a gentle stop, and immediately the outside world transformed into a symphony of camera clicks and excited voices. But before the doors opened, before they stepped into their public roles, Catherine made a silent promise to herself and to the child waiting in the crowd. Tonight would be about more than duty. It would be about connection, about using their platform to bring joy and hope to people who needed it most. The Royal Variety performance raised money for charity, supporting entertainers who had fallen on hard times, and that mission would guide every handshake, every smile, every moment under the spotlight. William squeezed her hand one last time. "Ready, darling?" Catherine took a deep breath, transforming from wife and mother into the Princess of Wales. But unlike previous events, this time she felt the weight of her role not as a burden, but as an opportunity. "Ready." The car door opened, and the London night erupted in cheers. Camera flashes turned the darkness into artificial daylight as William emerged first, turning to help Catherine from the vehicle. Her navy gown flowed elegantly as she stepped onto the red carpet, her smile genuine and radiant. The crowd's enthusiasm was infectious, and Catherine found herself genuinely enjoying the energy. She waved to the little girl with the homemade sign, making direct eye contact that sent the child into raptures of excitement. The moment was captured by dozens of photographers, but for Catherine, it felt beautifully private, a connection between two people that transcended protocol and position. As they made their way toward the entrance, stopping to chat with organizers and VIP guests, Catherine noticed something that made her pause. Among the dignitaries and celebrities, she spotted James Morrison, a performer she recognized from their charity work. Just 6 months ago, James had been homeless, struggling with addiction, and convinced his life held no value. Tonight, he stood confident and clean, scheduled to perform a song he'd written about redemption and second chances. His transformation was a testament to the very charity work this evening supported, and seeing him there, ready to share his story through music, reminded Catherine why these formal events mattered so much. "James," she called out, breaking slightly from protocol to approach him personally. The young man's face lit up with surprise and gratitude. "Your Royal Highness, I can't believe you remembered my name. How could I forget? I heard you're performing tonight. Are you nervous?" James's honest answer surprised everyone within earshot. "Terrified, but 6 months ago I was sleeping in doorways and convinced I'd never amount to anything. Tonight, I'm performing for future monarchs. If that's not proof that lives can change, I don't know what is." William joined the conversation, placing a supportive hand on James's shoulder. "We'll be cheering you on from the royal box." As they continued toward their seats, Catherine felt a familiar warmth spreading through her chest. The same feeling she experienced when her children accomplished something that made them proud, or when William surprised her with unexpected tenderness after a particularly challenging day. This was why they endured the separation from their children, the constant scrutiny, the weight of expectation. For moments like these, when their presence could amplify stories of hope and transformation. The Royal Albert Hall's interior took Catherine's breath away, as it did every time she entered. The ornate architecture seemed to whisper stories of all the performances and moments of history it had witnessed. Tonight, it would witness another chapter, not just of royal duty fulfilled, but of human connection transcending the boundaries of status and circumstance. As they settled into the royal box, overlooking the magnificent venue filled with expectant faces, Catherine caught William's eye. In that shared glance, they communicated what words couldn't capture: the privilege and responsibility of their position, the love that grounded them through every public appearance, and the hope that their children would one day understand the importance of using power in service of others. The lights began to dim, and the evening's magic was about to begin. But for Catherine, the most important performance had already started: the daily act of balancing love and duty, family and service, personal happiness and public responsibility. Tonight, under the bright lights and watchful eyes of a nation, she would continue that performance with grace, authenticity, and a heart full of hope for the future. In the darkness, just before the first act took the stage, Catherine whispered a silent thank you to the universe for the opportunity to be exactly where she was, with exactly the person beside her, serving exactly the purpose they had been called to fulfill. The night was just beginning, but already it felt like the kind of evening that would be remembered not just for its glamour, but for its heart. The first performer stepped into the golden spotlight, and the Royal Albert Hall fell into that perfect silence that only comes when thousands of people hold their breath simultaneously. Catherine leaned forward slightly in the royal box, her attention completely captured by the young woman standing alone on the vast stage below. Sophie Chun, barely 19 years old, clutched her microphone with hands that trembled slightly despite months of preparation. Her story was one that had touched Catherine deeply during the pre-show briefings. A refugee who had arrived in Britain with nothing but a backpack full of dreams and a voice that could move mountains. As Sophie began to sing, her voice soaring through the ancient hall with a purity that seemed to touch every soul present, Catherine felt tears threatening to spill. The song was about finding home in unexpected places, about strangers becoming family, about hope persisting even when everything familiar disappears. William noticed his wife's emotional response and gently placed his hand over hers. These moments of genuine human connection were what made the formal requirements of their roles worthwhile. In the darkness of the royal box, surrounded by the weight of tradition and expectation, they could still be simply two people moved by beauty and courage. Sophie's performance built to a crescendo that left the entire audience breathless. When the final note faded into silence, the applause was thunderous and sustained. People rose to their feet as one, and Catherine found herself clapping with an enthusiasm that would make headlines in tomorrow's papers. Not because it was calculated for the cameras, but because it was impossible to respond any other way. As the young singer took her bow, her eyes found the royal box. The moment their gazes met, Sophie's composure cracked, and tears of joy and disbelief streamed down her face. Catherine, abandoning protocol completely, stood and raised her hands above her head in appreciation, her own tears now flowing freely. The gesture was captured by every photographer in the venue, but Catherine didn't care about the images that would circulate worldwide. In that moment, she was simply a woman celebrating another woman's triumph over adversity. During the brief intermission that followed, Catherine found herself thinking about her own children's talents and dreams. George had recently started violin lessons and practiced with the same determination Sophie must have shown. Charlotte wrote songs in her diary, melodies that drifted through their home like whispered secrets. And Louis, though still very young, had already shown an ear for music that made his parents exchange knowing glances. She was extraordinary, William murmured, still moved by the performance. I keep thinking about courage, Catherine replied. What it must have taken for her to leave everything she knew, to start over in a new country, and then to stand on this stage tonight and share her story through song. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sir David Hartwell, the evening's host and a beloved figure in British entertainment. His approach to the royal box during intermission was part of the evening's tradition, a moment for the royals to connect personally with the organizers and express their appreciation. "Your Royal Highnesses," Sir David said with a warm smile, "I hope you're enjoying the evening." "It's been magical," Catherine said immediately. "That young woman, Sophie, her story is incredibly moving. She specifically requested to perform tonight because she wanted to thank this country for giving her a new life," Sir David explained. "All the money raised this evening goes to supporting performers who are struggling, and Sophie wanted to give back to the community that embraced her." William shook his head in admiration. From refugee to performer to philanthropist in just 3 years. "That's remarkable." "Speaking of remarkable," Sir David continued, his eyes twinkling with mischief, "we have a special surprise planned for the second half. James Morrison, the young man you spoke with earlier, has written a song specifically for tonight. It's about transformation and second chances, and he's dedicated it to the charity work you both support." Catherine felt her heart skip. The idea that their work, their presence, their advocacy had inspired someone to create art was both humbling and energizing. "That's incredibly thoughtful." "There's more," Sir David added. "He's asked if you would be willing to join him on stage for a brief moment during the song. Nothing formal, just a gesture of solidarity with the people this charity supports." The request was unusual, requiring them to step outside their typical role as observers and become participants in the performance. Catherine looked at William, and in that silent communication that long-married couple's perfect, they reached a decision. "We'd be honored," William said. As Sir David departed to prepare for the second half, Catherine felt a familiar flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. The kind of feeling she'd experienced before their wedding, before the births of their children, before any moment that would become a treasured memory. "Are you sure about this?" William asked, reading her expression. "I'm sure about what it represents," she replied. "James could have performed anywhere tonight, for anyone. But he chose to dedicate his art to the cause we support. How can we not stand with him?" The lights dimmed again, and the second half began with a comedy act that had the entire audience laughing until their sides ached. Catherine found herself genuinely delighted by the performer's wit, her laughter unguarded and infectious. William, caught up in her joy, laughed even harder at her reactions than at the jokes themselves. These moments of pure happiness were precious and rare. So much of their public life involved careful consideration of every expression, every gesture, every response. Tonight, surrounded by the magic of live entertainment and the warmth of shared experience, they could simply enjoy themselves. As James Morrison was introduced and walked onto the stage, Catherine's attention sharpened. The young man she'd spoken with earlier carried himself with a confidence that transformation had given him. His guitar gleamed under the lights, and when he began to play, the melody was hauntingly beautiful. His song told the story of falling into darkness, of losing hope, of finding help from unexpected sources, and ultimately of discovering that every ending could become a new beginning. The lyrics were personal and specific, but their message was universal. In the audience, Catherine could see people wiping away tears, moved by the honesty and courage of James's storytelling. When a moment came for their appearance on stage, Catherine felt her public persona slide into place like a familiar coat. But underneath, her genuine appreciation for James's journey and his art remained unchanged. As they walked onto the stage to join him for the song's final chorus, the audience erupted in surprised delight. Standing beside James, adding their voices to his message of hope and renewal, Catherine felt the power of their platform in a way that was both overwhelming and inspiring. This wasn't about them. It was about amplifying his voice, his story, his message that lives could change for the better with support and opportunity. When the song ended and they embraced James on stage, Catherine whispered, "Thank you for sharing your gift with us." James's response was barely audible to anyone else, but it reached her heart clearly. "Thank you for showing me that my story matters." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of exceptional performances, dancers who defied gravity, comedians who found humor in everyday struggles, musicians who created magic with their instruments. But for Catherine, the heart of the night had been those moments of genuine human connection. As they prepared to leave the royal box for the traditional meet and greet with performers, Catherine paused to look out over the audience one more time. Thousands of faces looked back, each representing a life, a story, a dream. Some were struggling, some were celebrating, some were simply seeking a few hours of entertainment to brighten their days. "Penny, for your thoughts?" William asked, joining her at the balcony rail. "I'm thinking about privilege," she said slowly. "Not the material kind, but the privilege of being trusted with other people's stories. Sophie's courage, James's transformation, all the artists who shared pieces of their souls tonight. They trusted us to witness their vulnerability and honor their gifts." William nodded, understanding flooding his expression. "It's a sacred trust." "Exactly. And I want our children to understand that. The fancy clothes, the beautiful venues, the cameras, and attention, none of that is the point. The point is using whatever platform we have to celebrate human resilience and creativity." As they made their way backstage, Catherine's mind was already turning to the conversation she would have with George, Charlotte, and Louis when she returned home. How could she help them understand that their privileged position came with the responsibility to lift others up? How could she teach them to see beyond the surface glamour to the deeper purpose of service? The backstage area buzzed with post-performance energy. Performers still glowed with adrenaline. Staff members efficiently managed the organized chaos, and the atmosphere crackled with the satisfaction of a job well done. Catherine moved through the crowd with genuine curiosity about each person's story. She spoke with the elderly dancer who had returned to the stage after recovering from a stroke, listened to the young comedian's plans to use humor therapy in children's hospitals, and learn about the classical pianist who taught music to underprivileged youth in her spare time. Each conversation reinforced her growing understanding that tonight had been about much more than entertainment. It had been a celebration of the human spirit, a demonstration of how art could heal, inspire, and transform both creators and audiences. When they finally reached James Morrison, who was carefully packing his guitar, Catherine felt compelled to express something that had been forming in her heart throughout the evening. "James," she began, "what you did tonight, sharing your story so honestly, turning your struggle into art that helps others, that's leadership. That's courage. That's exactly the kind of person I hope my children grow up to be." James looked up, his eyes bright with emotion. "Your Royal Highness, if I can help even one person believe that their life can change for the better, then everything I went through was worth it." As they left the Royal Albert Hall that night, stepping back into their waiting car for the journey home, Catherine felt fundamentally changed by the experience. The evening had reminded her that their role wasn't just about representing the monarchy or fulfilling ceremonial duties. It was about creating space for human stories to be told and celebrated. The London streets looked different now, less like a landscape they moved through and more like a community they served. Behind every lit window was a person with dreams, struggles, talents, and the potential for transformation. "That was special," William said as they settled into the back seat. "That was everything royal duty should be," Catherine replied. "Not about us being elevated above others, but about us creating opportunities for others to elevate themselves and each other." As their car glided through the night toward home and their sleeping children, Catherine already knew that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to honor the trust she felt so deeply tonight. The Royal Variety performance would end, but the connections made and the stories shared would continue to ripple outward, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen. Tonight had been a masterclass in the kind of leadership she hoped to model. not commanding from above, but standing alongside, celebrating together, and using privilege as a platform for others to shine. It was a lesson she would carry forward, and one she was eager to share with the three young hearts waiting at home. The journey home from the Royal Albert Hall stretched longer than usual through London's quiet streets. Catherine found herself reluctant to let go of the evening's magic, pressing her face against the cool window to watch the city drift by. The streetlights cast golden pools on empty pavements, and she imagined the lives unfolding behind the darkened windows. Families tucked into bed, dreamers still awake with their hopes, artists creating in solitude. Beside her, William reviewed the evening's official schedule on his tablet, making notes for the follow-up meetings and correspondence that would inevitably follow. But Catherine noticed his attention kept drifting to the window as well, both of them reluctant to transition from the intimacy of shared artistic experience back to the machinery of royal obligation. "The children will be asleep," Catherine murmured, though part of her hoped one of them might still be awake, eager to hear about the evening. She longed to share the magic of Sophie's voice, the courage of James's transformation, the joy that had filled the ancient hall. "George left a note under your pillow this morning," William said softly. Something about wanting to hear every single detail about the music. Catherine smiled, picturing her eldest son's careful handwriting. George approached everything with such earnest curiosity, and lately he'd been asking increasingly complex questions about their role in the world. Just last week, he'd wondered aloud why they lived in palaces when other people lived on the street. The question had launched a family conversation that lasted hours and left Catherine both proud of her son's compassion and aware of the delicate balance required to nurture empathy without overwhelming young hearts with the world's problems. As their car turned into the familiar gates of their residence, Catherine felt the evening's emotions settling into something deeper than satisfaction. Tonight had been a reminder of why their work mattered, but it had also highlighted the complexity of raising children who would inherit both privilege and responsibility. The house was quiet when they entered, their security team having coordinated their arrival to minimize disturbance. But as they climbed the stairs toward their private quarters, Catherine heard a soft sound that made her pause, the gentle murmur of someone reading aloud. Following the voice, she discovered their nanny, Maria, reading to young Louis in his room. The little boy was supposed to be asleep, but his eyes were wide open, focused intently on the pictures in his bedtime book. "Mummy," Louis whispered, his face lighting up as he spotted her in the doorway. Maria was reading about brave knights. Catherine entered the room, her evening gown rustling softly as she sat on the edge of a small bed. "And what did you learn about brave knights?" "That they help people," Louis said seriously. "And they have to be brave even when they're scared inside." The simple wisdom of her youngest child's observation struck Catherine profoundly. Louis, at barely 5 years old, had unknowingly captured the essence of what she'd felt tonight. That true courage meant showing up for others despite your own fears and uncertainties. "That's exactly right, sweetheart," she said, smoothing his hair. "Sometimes the bravest thing is just being there for someone who needs you." "Were you brave tonight, Mummy?" The question was innocent, but it reached deep into Catherine's heart. Had she been brave? She'd smiled for cameras, fulfilled her ceremonial duties, connected with performers and audience members. But the real bravery, she realized, had belonged to people like Sophie and James, those who had risked vulnerability to share their authentic selves with the world. "I tried to be," she answered honestly. "I met some incredibly brave people tonight. People who shared their stories even though it was scary. People who turned their struggles into art to help others." Louis nodded seriously, as if this made perfect sense to his young mind. Like the knights. Exactly like the knights. After tucking Louis back into bed with promises to tell him more stories in the morning, Catherine found William checking on Charlotte and George. Both older children were deeply asleep, but Charlotte had left a drawing on her pillow, a colorful sketch of the Royal Albert Hall with "For Mummy" and "Daddy's Big Night" written in her careful script. Standing in the hallway outside their children's rooms, Catherine felt the full weight of the evening settling over her. The joy, the inspiration, the connections made, all of it was meaningful. But it was also preparation for something larger, something that extended far beyond a single night of entertainment. "We need to talk," she said quietly to William, gesturing toward their private sitting room. They settled into the comfortable chairs by the fireplace, Catherine finally allowing herself to remove her formal shoes and curl her feet underneath her. The elegant gown that had photographed so beautifully now felt like a costume she was ready to shed, though the emotions of the evening remained vivid and immediate. "What's on your mind?" William asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Tonight was extraordinary," Catherine began slowly, "but it also highlighted something I've been thinking about for months. How do we prepare our children for what's coming? How do we teach them to use their privilege responsibly without overwhelming them with the weight of it?" William leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. This conversation had been developing between them gradually, sparked by their children's growing awareness of their unique position and the increasing complexity of a world they would inherit. "George asked me yesterday if being king means you can make all the bad things go away," William said. "When I explained that it doesn't work that way, that leadership is more about service than power, he wanted to know why anyone would want the job." Catherine laughed softly, but it was tinged with understanding. "Charlotte asked me something similar. She wanted to know why we have to dress up and go to events when we could just send money to help people instead. And what did you tell her? That showing up matters. That sometimes people need to see that others care about their stories, not just their problems." But I'm not sure she understood. William reached for Catherine's hand, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of a dozen years of marriage. "Maybe understanding comes with time. Maybe our job right now is just to model the behavior we want them to emulate. But what if we're modeling the wrong things?" Catherine asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in her heart. "What if they see the glamour and the attention and miss the service? What if they grow up thinking this life is about being special rather than being useful?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Both had grown up with privilege, but they'd also been shaped by parents who emphasized responsibility and service. The challenge was creating that same foundation for children whose lives were even more public, more scrutinized, more removed from ordinary experience. "I think about Diana a lot lately," William said quietly. "How she used her position to shine light on causes that others ignored. The AIDS epidemic, landmines, homelessness. She didn't just attend charity galas. She changed how people thought about these issues." Catherine squeezed his hand. William rarely spoke about his mother in detail, but when he did, it was always with a mixture of pride, love, and a determination to honor her legacy while forging his own path. "Tonight reminded me of that," she said. "When James dedicated his song to the charity work we support, when Sophie used her platform to thank the country that gave her refuge. That's the kind of leadership I want our children to see. Not just using your voice because you can, but using it because others need it amplified. So how do we teach them that?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the evening's encounters, about her children's questions, about the weight of preparing young hearts for a lifetime of service. "We start by including them more," she said finally. "Not in the formal events. They're still too young for most of that. But in the conversations about why we do this work. We let them meet people like James and Sophie when it's appropriate. We show them that every person we encounter has a story worth hearing." William nodded slowly. "And we make sure they understand that privilege is not about being better than others, but about having more opportunities to help others." "Exactly. We teach them that a platform is not a pedestal. It's a responsibility." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of parenthood and duty intertwining in ways that were both daunting and deeply meaningful. Outside their window, London continued its quiet nighttime existence. 8 million people pursuing their dreams, facing their challenges, creating their own stories. "There's something else," Catherine said eventually. Tonight made me realize that we need to be more intentional about choosing which events to attend. Not every royal engagement carries the same potential for meaningful connection. We should prioritize opportunities where our presence can genuinely amplify important voices or causes. William considered this. The royal calendar was typically planned months in advance, with appearances scheduled based on tradition, obligation, and diplomatic necessity. The idea of being more selective, more strategic about their public engagements was both appealing and potentially controversial. The institution might resist that kind of change, he pointed out. Then, we help them understand that effectiveness matters more than visibility, Catherine replied. Tonight reached millions of people not because we were there, but because we were genuinely engaged with what was happening. That authenticity is what resonated. You're talking about changing how the monarchy works. Catherine met his gaze steadily. I'm talking about making sure it continues to work. Our children will inherit a very different world than the one we grew up in. People expect more transparency, more genuine connection, more evidence that their institutions serve them rather than the other way around. It was a conversation that would continue for years, Catherine knew. The balance between tradition and relevance, between personal authenticity and institutional dignity, between protecting their children and preparing them for their roles. These tensions would shape every decision they made as parents and as future monarchs. But tonight had given her hope. In Sophie's courage, in James's transformation, in the audience's genuine response to authentic storytelling, she'd seen proof that people still crave connection, still believed in the power of shared experience, still wanted to be part of something larger than themselves. I keep thinking about what Lewis said, she told William, about brave knights helping people even when they're scared inside. Wisdom from the mouths of babes. Maybe that's what we teach them. That being royal doesn't mean being fearless. It means being brave enough to care about others even when it's difficult or complicated or uncertain. William smiled, the expression transforming his tired face. I like that. It's honest without being overwhelming. And it's something they can start practicing now in small ways. Being kind to their classmates who are struggling, sharing their toys, speaking up when they see unfairness, even on a playground scale. Building the muscles they'll need for bigger challenges later. Exactly. As they finally prepared for bed, Catherine found herself thinking about tomorrow's schedule. There would be phone calls to make, thank you notes to write, follow-up meetings about the evening's success. But there would also be breakfast with her children, stories to share about brave performers, and beautiful music, questions to answer about why their parents' work mattered. The evening gown was carefully hung away, the jewelry returned to its cases, the public faces set aside until the next engagement. But the emotions, the connections, the renewed sense of purpose, those would remain, woven into the fabric of their daily life, and the ongoing project of raising children who would understand both their privilege and their responsibility. Standing in front of her dressing room mirror, Catherine looked beyond her reflection to see William moving quietly through their bedroom, already thinking about tomorrow's obligations. In a few hours, they would wake up and return to their roles as parents first, royals second. But tonight had reminded them that those roles didn't have to conflict. They could enhance each other, creating a more authentic and effective form of leadership. The royal variety performance was over, but its impact would continue rippling through their lives, their children's understanding, and their approach to the work that lay ahead. Sometimes the most important moments happen not on stage or in front of cameras, but in quiet conversations afterward when hearts were open and the real work of transformation could begin. The sunrise crept through the silk curtains of the royal residence with gentle persistence, casting warm golden light across the bedroom, where Catherine and William lay in the peaceful quiet that preceded their household awakening. Catherine had been awake for several minutes, her mind already turning over the events of the previous evening and the conversations that would shape their day. Somewhere down the hall, she could hear the soft murmur of their children beginning to stir, the gentle voices of their staff preparing for another day in a life that balanced extraordinary public responsibility with the ordinary needs of a young family. These morning moments, before the day's schedule took hold, were precious and rare. William stirred beside her, immediately alert in the way that years of royal duty had trained him to be. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning," Catherine replied, turning to face him. "Did you sleep well?" "Eventually. I kept thinking about last night, about everything we discussed." Catherine smiled, understanding completely. The evening at the Royal Albert Hall had been more than entertainment. It had been a catalyst for conversations and realizations that would influence their family for years to come. The quiet was interrupted by the sound of small feet running down the hallway, followed by George's voice calling out, "Is anyone awake? I want to hear about the concert." Catherine and William exchanged amused glances. Their eldest son's enthusiasm for their royal engagements was both endearing and encouraging. Unlike some children of public figures who showed little interest in their parents' work, George seemed genuinely curious about the world beyond their family life. "Come in, sweetheart," Catherine called, and moments later, George appeared in the doorway, his hair standing up in several directions and his favorite dinosaur pajamas slightly twisted from sleep. "Tell me everything," he said, climbing onto the bed with the unconscious confidence of a child who had always known himself to be deeply loved. "Was the music really good? Did people clap a lot? Did you meet anyone famous?" Catherine pulled her son close, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair and feeling the solid warmth of his small body against hers. How could she explain the complexity of the previous evening to an 8-year-old? How could she convey the deeper meanings without overwhelming his young understanding? "The music was beautiful," she began. "We heard a young woman sing who came to England from very far away, and she was so grateful to be here that she wanted to share her gift with everyone. Like when I want to show you my drawings because I'm happy." George asked. "Exactly like that. Sometimes when people are really grateful or really happy, they want to share something special with others." William joined the conversation, sitting up in bed to include George more fully. "We also met a man who had been very sad and lost for a while, but he found help and got better. He wrote a song about becoming happy again, and we got to hear him sing it." George considered this seriously. He was at an age where the concepts of sadness and recovery were beginning to make sense, though Catherine was always careful about how much of the world's complexity to share with him. "Was he sad like when Charlotte cries about her nightmares?" George asked. "More sad than that," Catherine said gently. "Sometimes grown-ups have very big sadness that takes a long time to get better. But the important thing is that he did get better, and now he helps other people who are sad too. Is that why you and Daddy go to these places? To help sad people feel better?" The simple directness of the question struck both parents. Children had a way of cutting through complexity to reach the essential truth of any situation. "That's part of it," William said. "We go to celebrate people who are brave and to show support for people who help others and to learn about different ways people live and work. And to listen to really good music," George added practically, making his parents laugh. "Yes, and to listen to really good music." Charlotte appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sounds of conversation. At 6, she was more reserved than her older brother, but equally curious about her parents' world. She approached the bed more cautiously, as if unsure whether the conversation was something she should join. "Come here, darling," Catherine invited, and Charlotte climbed up beside her brother, snuggling into the warmth of her parents' attention. "George was asking about our evening," William explained. "Would you like to hear about it too?" Charlotte nodded, her serious expression reminding Catherine powerfully of William at that age. Thoughtful, observant, carrying some invisible weight of understanding that seemed beyond her years. Catherine found herself describing Sophie's performance again, but this time she focused on different details. There was a young woman who was very brave. She stood up in front of thousands of people, all by herself, and sang about finding a new home when she had to leave her old one. Was she scared? Charlotte asked. I think she might have been a little scared, Catherine admitted. But she was brave anyway. Sometimes being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do something important even if it feels scary. Charlotte absorbed this thoughtfully. Catherine could almost see her daughter processing the information, fitting it into her developing understanding of how the world worked. Could I do that? Charlotte asked quietly. Sing for lots of people? The question caught Catherine off guard. Charlotte had always been musical, often humming little songs to herself, but she'd never expressed interest in performing for others. Would you want to? Catherine asked carefully. Charlotte considered. Maybe, if I had something important to sing about. What kind of important thing? George asked, his practical nature asserting itself. Maybe about being kind to animals, or helping children who don't have enough food. Catherine felt her heart expand with pride and love. Her 6-year-old daughter was already thinking about using her potential talents in service of causes larger than herself. Those would be very important things to sing about, William said seriously. Music has a special way of helping people understand and care about things. Is that why people made music at your event? Charlotte asked. Exactly. They use their music to tell stories and help people understand different experiences. The conversation was interrupted by Louis's arrival, still in his pajamas and carrying his favorite stuffed elephant. At 4, he was less interested in the details of his parents' work than in the simple fact of their presence. Mummy, Daddy, he said, climbing into the crowded bed. Did you see any elephants last night? Catherine laughed, pulling her youngest close. No elephants, sweetheart. But we did see people who were as brave as elephants. Elephants are very brave, Louis agreed seriously. They protect their families. Yes, they do. And last night we met people who protect their communities by sharing their talents and helping others. As the morning continued, with all 3 children eventually assembled in their parents' bed, Catherine found herself sharing story after story from the previous evening. She told them about the elderly dancer who had learned to walk again after being very sick, about the comedian who made jokes to help people feel better when they were worried, about the orchestra that played music so beautiful it made people cry happy tears. With each story, she watched her children's faces, seeing their understanding deepen, their empathy expand, their sense of possibility grow. These were the moments that mattered most, not the formal ceremonies or the media coverage, but these quiet family conversations where values were transmitted and character was shaped. I want to meet these people, George announced. The ones who help other people feel better. Maybe someday you will, Catherine said. But first, you can practice helping people feel better in your own life. At school, with your friends, even with Charlotte and Louis when they're sad or worried. I already do that, George protested. You do, Catherine agreed. And that's exactly the same spirit that the people we met last night have. They just do it on a bigger stage. William, who had been listening quietly to the exchange, spoke up. Do you know what impressed me most about last night? It wasn't the fancy clothes or the famous people or the beautiful building. It was seeing how happy people became when they felt heard and appreciated. What does that mean? Louis asked. It means, Catherine explained, that when someone pays attention to you and shows they care about what you have to say, it makes you feel good inside. Like when I listen to your stories about school, or when Daddy watches you build with your blocks. Oh, Louis said, understanding immediately. Like when you really look at my drawings instead of just saying nice job. Catherine felt a small pang of recognition. How often had she offered distracted praise instead of genuine attention? How many opportunities for real connection had she missed in the rush of daily life? Exactly like that, she said. And last night, we tried to really pay attention to all the people we met to show them that their stories and their talents mattered to us. That's why they were so happy, Charlotte said, making the connection. Because you really listened. And because we felt grateful to them for sharing something special with us, William added. When someone gives you a gift, like music or a story or a joke that makes you laugh, the best thing you can give back is your attention and appreciation. The conversation gradually evolved into planning for the day ahead. There were lessons to attend, friends to play with, and the normal rhythms of childhood to maintain. But Catherine noticed something different in her children's demeanor, a new awareness of the connection between their family's public life and their private values. As they prepared for breakfast, George asked if they could write thank you notes to some of the performers from the previous evening. Charlotte wondered if there were ways for children to help the charity that supported struggling artists. Even Louis, in his 4-year-old way, seemed more conscious of the idea that helping others was part of their family's purpose. During breakfast, the conversation continued as they planned the day ahead. Catherine found herself seeing their daily routine with fresh eyes, recognizing opportunities to reinforce the lessons of the previous evening. When Charlotte mentioned that a classmate had been sad recently because her grandmother was sick, Catherine suggested they make a card together. When George talked about a boy at school who seemed lonely, William proposed inviting him for a playdate. When Louis wanted to give his old toys to children who don't have enough, Catherine realized their 4-year-old had absorbed more from their conversations than she'd expected. "Mummy," George said as they finished eating, "when I'm older and have to do royal things like you, and Daddy, will I know how to make people feel better?" The question was asked with such earnest concern that Catherine felt tears threaten. Her son was already thinking about the responsibility that would one day be his, already worrying about his ability to serve others effectively. "You're already learning," she assured him. "Every time you're kind to someone, every time you listen to a friend who's worried, every time you share something you care about, you're practicing the same skills we used last night." And William added, "By the time you're ready for bigger responsibilities, you'll have had lots of practice with smaller ones." That's how people become good at anything. They start with little steps. "Like learning to ride a bike," Louis suggested. "Exactly like learning to ride a bike. You start with training wheels, then you practice with someone holding on, and eventually you can ride by yourself." Catherine watched her children absorb this analogy, seeing their understanding click into place. The metaphor was perfect for their young minds, the idea that their current acts of kindness and attention were training wheels for the larger service they would one day provide. As the morning progressed, and the children scattered to their various activities, Catherine found herself reflecting on the previous evening with new appreciation. The Royal Variety performance had been successful by any measure, well-attended, beautifully executed, effectively raising money for charity. But its greatest success might be happening right now, in the ongoing conversations with their children about purpose, service, and the responsibility that comes with privilege. Later, as she reviewed the day's schedule with her private secretary, Catherine made several spontaneous additions. She wanted to write personal notes to Sophie and James, thanking them not just for their performances, but for the inspiration they had provided. She asked for information about visiting some of the programs that supported struggling artists, thinking that a less formal, more intimate engagement might be more meaningful than the typical ceremonial appearances. Most importantly, she blocked out time later in the week for a family visit to a local community center where children could volunteer in age-appropriate ways. If her children were going to learn about service, she wanted them to experience it directly, not just observe it from a distance. The morning light had fully filled their home now, banishing the shadows and illuminating the day's possibilities. Catherine felt energized and purposeful in a way that extended beyond the previous evening's success. She had been reminded of why their work mattered, but more than that, she had seen how that meaning could be transmitted to the next generation. Standing at her bedroom window, looking out over the gardens where her children would soon be playing, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life that allowed her to serve others while nurturing her own family. The balance wasn't always easy, but moments like these, when purpose and parenthood aligned so clearly, made every challenge worthwhile. The day ahead would bring its own demands and opportunities, but it would unfold with the foundation of the previous evening's connections and this morning's conversations. The Royal Variety performance was over, but its real impact was just beginning, in the lives touched by the money raised, in the artists who felt seen and appreciated, and, most importantly, in the young hearts learning what it meant to use privilege in service of others. Tonight, When she tucked her children into bed, Catherine would have new stories to tell and new understanding to share. The cycle of connection and service would continue, one conversation and one act of kindness at a time. 3 months had passed since the Royal Variety performance, but its impact continued to unfold in ways both seen and unseen. Catherine stood in her private office, reading through a stack of letters that had arrived that morning. Personal messages from people whose lives had been touched by that single evening's connections. The first letter was from Sophie Chun, the young refugee whose performance had opened a show. Sophie wrote about the scholarship opportunities that had come her way following her appearance. But more importantly, she described how the confidence gained from performing for royalty had changed her entire approach to her new life in Britain. She had started volunteering with other refugee families, using music therapy to help children process trauma and find their voices. Catherine smiled as she read Sophie's careful handwriting, remembering the trembling young woman who had stepped onto the stage 3 months ago. The transformation described in the letter was remarkable, but it was also exactly what Catherine had hoped for, that their platform could amplify individual voices in ways that created lasting change. The second letter came from James Morrison's mother. Through tears of joy, she described watching her son not only maintain his sobriety, but become a mentor to other young people struggling with addiction. The song he had written for the Royal Variety performance had been recorded and was now being used in rehabilitation programs across the country. But what moved his mother most was seeing her son's sense of purpose restored, knowing that his painful journey had meaning because it could help others find their way to healing. William appeared in the doorway, having finished his morning meetings with various charitable organizations. "Any interesting mail today?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Letters from Sophie and James Morrison's family," Catherine replied, sliding the papers across to him. "Their lives have changed significantly since the performance." William read through the letters with the same mixture of satisfaction and humility that Catherine had felt. Their role in these transformations had been relatively small, providing a platform, offering encouragement, showing genuine interest. But sometimes small actions in the right moment could catalyze profound change. "This is what we talked about that night," William said. "The ripple effect of authentic connection. And it's still expanding," Catherine added, pulling out a folder that contained reports from the charity that had benefited from the evening's fundraising. "The money raised that night has provided emergency assistance to 47 struggling performers, funded mental health support programs, and established 3 new training workshops for young artists." But beyond the quantifiable impacts, Catherine had been most struck by the qualitative changes she'd observed in their own family. Their children's understanding of their role had deepened considerably, shaped by the ongoing conversations that had grown out of that one evening. George had taken to asking about the real people behind their formal engagements, wanting to understand the human stories that formal protocols sometimes obscured. Charlotte had started a small music group at school, teaching younger children songs while raising money for children's charities. Even Louis, in his 4-year-old way, had become more conscious of sharing and helping others who might need support. "Speaking of ripple effects," Williams said, "I had an interesting conversation with George yesterday. He asked if he could attend one of our visits to the community center. He wants to see what real helping looks like." Catherine felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest. Their 8-year-old son was actively seeking ways to engage with the family's mission of service. "What did you tell him?" "That we discussed it as a family. I think he's old enough to observe some of our less formal charitable work, as long as we're careful about protecting the privacy of the people we're there to support." It was a delicate balance, exposing their children to the realities of service while protecting both the children's innocence and the dignity of those they served. But George's request suggested he was developing the kind of empathy and curiosity that would serve him well in his future role. Their conversation was interrupted by Catherine's private secretary, who knocked gently before entering. "Your Royal Highness, there's been a development regarding the Royal Variety performance that you should be aware of." Catherine looked up with interest. "What kind of development?" "The BBC has proposed creating a documentary about the lasting impact of the evening's performances. They want to follow up with the artists who participated, particularly Sophie Chun and James Morrison, to show how that single night has influenced their ongoing work. The proposal was intriguing, but also raised immediate concerns for Catherine. While she appreciated the desire to highlight the positive outcomes, she worried about exploiting the vulnerability of people who had already shared so much of themselves. "Have they spoken with the artists about this?" Catherine asked. "Yes, ma'am." Apparently, Sophie and James both enthusiastically agreed to participate. They specifically want to share how their connection with you and Prince William has continued to influence their work. They feel it could inspire other young people to pursue their dreams despite difficult circumstances. William leaned forward with interest. What kind of format are they envisioning? A 1-hour documentary that would follow their journeys over the past 3 months, including their ongoing charitable work and artistic development. They proposed that you and Prince William could provide brief interviews about your perspective on the evening and your philosophy of using royal platforms to amplify individual voices. Catherine considered the proposal carefully. The potential benefits were significant, showcasing authentic stories of transformation and resilience, demonstrating the practical impact of charitable work and modeling a different approach to royal engagement. But she also wanted to ensure that any participation remained true to the values that had made the original evening so meaningful. "I'd like to speak with Sophie and James directly before making any decision," she said finally. "If they genuinely want to share their stories and feel it could help others, then we should support that. But I want to make sure this documentary serves their goals, not just our public image." "Of course, ma'am. I'll arrange those conversations." After her secretary left, Catherine found herself reflecting on how different this felt from traditional royal media opportunities. Instead of carefully scripted appearances designed to project a certain image, this would be an authentic exploration of real relationships and genuine impact. "It's interesting," she said to William, "how the evening keeps evolving. 3 months later, and it's still creating new opportunities for connection and service. That's the difference between genuine engagement and performative duty," William replied. "When you create real relationships with real people, those connections continue to grow and develop naturally." The afternoon brought a surprise visit from Charlotte, who had finished her lessons early and wanted to share something she'd been working on. She approached her parents' office with a carefully folded piece of paper in her hands. "I wrote something," she announced, her usual reserve mixed with excitement. "It's a song, like the lady at your concert." Catherine felt her heart skip as Charlotte unfolded her paper to reveal neat handwriting covering both sides. "Would you like to sing it for us?" Charlotte nodded, though Catherine could see the nervousness in her daughter's expression. Taking a deep breath, Charlotte began to sing in her clear, sweet voice. "When someone is sad and feeling alone, we can help them find their way back home. Not to a house with walls and doors, but to feeling loved and safe once more." The simple melody carried profound wisdom, and Catherine found herself deeply moved by her daughter's understanding of home as an emotional state rather than just a physical place. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," William said when Charlotte finished. "What made you think to write about helping people find home?" "I kept thinking about the lady you met who had to leave her home," Charlotte explained, "and how you said she found a new home by sharing her music. I wanted to write about how we can all help people feel like they belong somewhere." Catherine pulled her daughter close, overwhelmed by the depth of empathy and understanding in her 6-year-old's heart. That's exactly what music can do. Help people feel less alone and more connected to others. "Could I sing it at school?" Charlotte asked. "Maybe for the little children who sometimes cry because they miss their parents?" The question perfectly captured what Catherine had hoped the royal variety performance would inspire. Not just appreciation for professional artists, but an understanding that everyone had the power to use their gifts in service of others. "I think that would be wonderful," Catherine said. "Music has a special way of making people feel better." As Charlotte skipped away, Pleased with her parents' response, Catherine felt a profound sense of gratitude for the way that single evening had continued to ripple through their family life. The formal event had ended months ago, but its real purpose, connecting with others and inspiring service, was still unfolding in their daily conversations and their children's growing understanding of their role in the world. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Catherine found herself looking around the table with fresh appreciation. George was describing his plans for a school project about people who help others, clearly influenced by their ongoing discussions about service. Charlotte hummed her new song under her breath while cutting her vegetables. Louis was carefully sharing his food with his stuffed elephant, practicing the generosity that had become a family value. "I have an announcement," William said as they finished their meal. "The community sitter we've been supporting has invited our family to attend their monthly celebration dinner. It's not a formal event, just families gathering to share food and music and celebrate their achievements. Can we really go?" George asked excitedly. "As a family?" "If you'd like to," Catherine said. "It would be a chance to meet some of the people whose lives have been touched by the work we support." "Yes," Charlotte said immediately. "I could bring my song, and I could bring some of my toys to share with children who might not have many," Louis added. Catherine felt tears threaten as she watched her children's enthusiasm for genuine service. This was what she had dreamed of, children who saw their privilege not as a source of entitlement, but as an opportunity to serve others. Later that night, as she and William prepared for bed, Catherine reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a single evening of entertainment. "Do you remember what we talked about that night?" she asked. "About teaching our children to see their platform as a responsibility rather than a privilege." "I remember everything about that night," William replied. "It changed something fundamental about how I understand our role." "It's working," Catherine said simply. "The children are learning not just to appreciate what they have, but to actively look for ways to share it with others. They're developing the instincts we hoped for. And we're learning too," William added. "Every interaction with people like Sophie and James teaches us something new about authentic leadership and genuine service." As they settled into bed, Catherine felt a deep sense of contentment about the direction their lives were taking. The Royal Variety performance had been just one evening in their royal calendar, but it had become a catalyst for a new approach to their role, one that prioritized genuine connection over ceremonial duty, that valued authentic relationships over public image, and that sought to create lasting positive change rather than just maintain traditions. Outside their window, London continued its nighttime existence. Millions of people pursuing their own dreams, facing their own challenges, creating their own stories. But Catherine no longer felt separate from those stories. Through their work, their children's developing empathy, and their commitment to authentic service, their family had become part of the larger community they served. The night was quiet and peaceful, but Catherine knew that tomorrow would bring new opportunities for connection and service. The ripple effect of that single evening would continue to expand, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen, creating positive change that extended far beyond any single royal appearance. As she drifted off to sleep, Catherine smiled, knowing that the most important performance of their lives was not the one that took place on stage, but the ongoing daily practice of using their platform to amplify other voices, support worthy causes, and raise children who understood that true nobility lay not in status or privilege, but in service to others. The Royal Variety performance had ended months ago, but its real purpose, the cultivation of human connection and the inspiration of service, would continue rippling outward for years to come, carried forward by artists like Sophie and James, by the charitable programs they supported, and, most importantly, by their children who were learning that the greatest use of any platform was to help others find their voice and share their gifts with the world. In the quiet darkness, Catherine felt profoundly grateful for the life that allowed her to serve others while nurturing her own family, knowing that the evening that had changed so much was just the beginning of a lifetime of meaningful connections and authentic service.